At first, nothing was wrong. People went to work, kids went to school, life was normal. Then people started leaving. One family, then another, then everyone. Some towns died in a year. Some took decades to disappear. Some were poisoned. Some were abandoned. One has been burning underground for over 60 years, and it's still not out. 13 towns, all gone, and almost no one remembers them. This is what happens when a country forgets its own people. Number 13. Glenrio, Texas/New Mexico. Glenrio sits on the border between Texas and New Mexico, and for 30 years it was one of the most important 2 square miles in America, even though most people couldn't find it on a map. It was a Route 66 town. If you were driving west in the 1940s or 1950s, you stopped in Glenrio. You had to. It was the only gas for miles in either direction. The diners were open all night. The motels had neon signs you could see from the highway. There was a dance hall, a bar that never closed, a motel on the Texas side called First in Texas, Last in Texas, depending on which direction you were headed, and its sign still stands today, still advertising rooms that haven't been rented in 50 years. Glenrio didn't fail because of drought or fire or economics. It was killed by geometry. In 1975, Interstate 40 was built 2 miles north of town. The trucks took the new road. The travelers took the new road. Within 5 years, every business in Glenrio had closed. The diner shut its doors. The motel locked its rooms. The gas stations went dry. Today, the buildings are still standing, roofless in most places, reclaimed by desert scrub. The Little Juarez Diner sign is still there. The State Line Bar is still there. A place that fed and sheltered hundreds of thousands of American families is rotting in silence 2 miles from an interstate that never looks back. The highway didn't destroy Glenrio. It just stopped looking at it. Number 12. Cahaba, Alabama. In 1820, Cahaba was the capital of Alabama. It had a statehouse, a newspaper, hotels, merchants, an ambitious young city on the Alabama River that genuinely believed it was going to be the center of everything. By 1826, it had lost the capital to Tuscaloosa, but it didn't die. It kept growing. By the 1850s, Cahaba was a prosperous cotton town. Warehouses packed with bales, steamboats loading at the docks, planters with enormous wealth built entirely on the labor of enslaved people. The town's prosperity and its ugliness were inseparable. Then came the Civil War, and with it, something that would permanently mark Cahaba's legacy. The Confederacy converted the town's largest warehouse into a prison camp called Castle Morgan, into a space designed for 700 people. They crammed over 3,000 Union soldiers. Men died of disease, starvation, and exposure in numbers that shocked even Confederate commanders. Survivors described conditions that bordered on medieval. After the war, Cahaba tried to rebuild, but the Alabama River had other ideas. The town flooded catastrophically in 1865, then again in 1874, and again. Built on a floodplain with no real solution, families simply left, one by one, house by house. By 1900, Cahaba was functionally empty. What remains today is 180 acres of archaeological site, brick columns rising from the earth, the ghosts of streets visible in the soil, one small church still standing. The river that built Cahaba eventually took it back. Locals say that on certain nights when the river is high and the fog sits low over the ruins, you can hear something moving through the old prison grounds. Most people say it's just the water. Number 11. Garnet, Montana. Garnet doesn't look abandoned. That's what makes it unusual. When you walk into one of the 30 buildings still standing in this Montana ghost town, you find furniture, you find dishes, you find personal belongings left exactly where people set them down when they walked out for the last time. Gold was discovered here in the 1860s. By the 1890s, Garnet had over 1,000 residents and 13 saloons because miners had very specific priorities. The first death came in 1912 when fire tore through the town. Half of Garnet burned down in a single afternoon. The mines were already running thin, so most residents didn't rebuild. They just left. But here's where Garnet's story gets unusual. It came back. In the 1930s, when the Great Depression had devastated the country and gold prices had risen dramatically, miners returned to Garnet. They rebuilt. Families moved in again. For about 10 years, Garnet was alive a second time. Then World War II began. The federal government declared gold mining non-essential to the war effort and ordered most operations to close. The miners left for defense factories and military service. The second departure was faster and quieter than the first. People left mid-life. They left dishes in the cabinets and clothes in the closets because they assumed they were coming back after the war. They never did, and nobody came to collect their things. Today, the Bureau of Land Management preserves Garnet. The interiors are frozen in time. A pair of boots by the door, a coffee cup on a shelf. 80 years of silence in a room that once held a family's entire world. Number 10. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Most ghost towns died because something left. Centralia is different. Centralia is a ghost town because something stayed. something that has been burning underground for over 60 years and shows no sign of stopping. Centralia was a coal mining community in eastern Pennsylvania, a typical company town. A few thousand people, a main street, churches, a strong union tradition, the kind of place you've seen on this list before. In May 1962, the town council hired workers to clean up an illegal dump site in a former strip mine outside of town. The workers set the trash on fire, a common practice at the time, but this particular pit connected to an abandoned coal seam. The fire followed it underground. They tried to put it out. They flooded it. They dug trenches. Nothing worked. For 20 years, the town pretended the fire wasn't a serious problem. Then sinkholes started opening in people's yards. Carbon monoxide began seeping into basements. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was standing in his grandmother's backyard when the ground opened beneath him. He dropped 4 feet into a steaming sinkhole before his cousin pulled him out. The hole was 80 feet deep. The air at the bottom was nearly pure carbon monoxide. After that, people started leaving. By 1992, the state condemned most of the remaining homes. By 2013, Centralia's zip code was officially eliminated. Today, fewer than 5 residents remain. People who refuse to sell, who refuse to leave the only home they ever knew, living on streets that end in nowhere, next to empty lots where their neighbors' houses used to stand. The fire is still burning. Scientists estimate it could continue for another 250 years. The highway near Centralia, Route 61, buckled from the underground heat and was closed and rerouted. The original stretch is still there, cracked, weeds pushing through the asphalt, graffiti covering every inch of it. People come from hundreds of miles away to walk it. It looks exactly like what it is, a road that leads to nowhere, built over a fire that will outlast everyone alive today. Number 9. Bannack, Montana. In 1862, gold was discovered in Grasshopper Creek in what would become Montana. Within months, 3,000 people had descended on the site. A town called Bannack materialized in the wilderness in a matter of weeks. It became Montana's first territorial capital. It had a hotel, a school, a Masonic lodge, a jail, and a problem so severe it earned Bannack a reputation as, in the words of one account, the toughest town in the West. The problem's name was Henry Plummer. Plummer was elected sheriff of Bannack in 1863. He was charming, well-dressed, and by all appearances, exactly the kind of law and order the town needed. He was also secretly the leader of a gang of road agents called the Innocents, over 100 men who robbed and murdered travelers on the roads around Bannack and nearby Virginia City. By the time he was caught, Plummer's gang had killed over 100 people. In January 1864, vigilantes hanged Plummer on the very gallows he had ordered built as sheriff. 2 of his deputies were hanged the same night. After the gold ran out in the 1870s, Bannack declined steadily. The capital moved, the miners moved, the businesses followed. What makes Bannack remarkable today is what's left. Over 60 buildings still standing in the Bannack State Park, some of the best preserved frontier-era structures in the American West. The hotel, the schoolhouse, the Masonic lodge, the jail where Plummer once locked up other men's criminals while his own gang operated in the hills around them. You can walk the streets of Bannack today. The gallows are still there. Some say they always will be. Number 8. Rhyolite, Nevada was born in a gold rush and died in a banking panic, and the whole arc from birth to death took exactly 12 years. Gold was discovered in the Bullfrog Hills in 1904. Within 2 years, 10,000 people lived in Rhyolite. There was a 3-story bank building with Italian marble and plate glass windows, a train depot served by 3 railroad companies simultaneously, a stock exchange, an opera house, an ice cream parlor, a red light district, a school with 250 students. The bank building alone cost $90,000 to construct in 1908, the equivalent of several $1 million today. Then the panic of 1907 hit. Banks across the country failed. Credit froze. The gold operations in Rhyolite, which had been running on borrowed money and optimism, collapsed in a matter of months. By 1910, the population had fallen from 10,000 to 675. By 1920, 14 people remained. By 1924, the power was shut off and the last resident left. 12 years. From nothing to 10,000 people. Back to nothing. The bank building is still standing. 3 stories of imported marble in the Nevada desert, empty windows framing the sky, the grand entrance leading nowhere. The train depot is still there. The old school walls, foundations of houses where families ate dinner and thought they were building something permanent. The desert has been patient. It will outlast everything Rhyolite ever built. Number 7. St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo is one of the most perfectly preserved ghost towns in America. Walking down its main street today feels like the calendar stopped in 1920 and nobody told the buildings. The town was established in 1880 as a supply and service hub for the silver and gold mines in the Chalk Creek Canyon of central Colorado. At its peak, 2,000 people lived in St. Elmo. There were hotels, a post office, saloons, a general store, and a school. The railroad was the town's lifeline. The Alpine Tunnel, at the time the highest railroad tunnel in North America, ran freight and passengers through St. Elmo, connecting the mines to the markets. In 1922, the railroad closed. The tunnel was too expensive to maintain, the ore seams had thinned, and the operating company simply walked away. Most of St. Elmo's residents left within a year, but one family didn't. The Stark family, a mother, her son Tony, and her daughter Annabelle, stayed. They operated the general store for decades after everyone else was gone. Annabelle, who never married and rarely left town, became a fixture of the ghost town itself. Visitors who came to photograph the ruins would find her still behind the counter of the old store. Decades after the last miner had departed, she became known locally as Dirty Annie. The name wasn't kind. She was fiercely protective of the town, suspicious of strangers, and increasingly eccentric as the years passed. Annabelle Stark died in 1960. Tony followed in 1972. They were the last full-time residents of St. Elmo. Today, the Colorado State Park System maintains the town. The buildings are remarkably intact. The general store the Starks operated for half a century still has its sign. And visitors still say that occasionally a door opens on its own in the old hotel, and that sometimes, if you're there at the right hour, you can hear footsteps on the main street that don't belong to anyone you can see. Number 6. Bodie, California. There is a phrase that defines Bodie, California, and it doesn't appear in any history book. It was supposedly said by a young girl whose family was moving there in 1879, after her father had struck it rich in the gold fields. She wrote in her diary, "Goodbye, God. I'm going to Bodie." Whether it's true or not, it captures something real about this place. Bodie, California boomed in the 1870s after a significant gold discovery in the eastern Sierra Nevada. By 1879, 10,000 people lived here. It was not a gentle town. There were 65 saloons. There was a red light district operating openly. The local newspaper reported at least one murder per day during the peak years. Bodie was, by contemporary accounts, genuinely lawless in a way that most Wild West mythology only pretends to be. The gold played out through the 1880s. By 1910, only a handful of operations remained. By 1942, when the last mine was ordered closed during the war, Bodie had fewer than a dozen residents. What makes Bodie different from almost every other ghost town in America is its state of preservation. California State Parks manages Bodie under a policy of arrested decay. They don't restore anything, but they maintain everything as it was. The result is 200 standing buildings in various stages of weathering, kitchen tables with dishes still on them, cans on store shelves, a piano in a saloon, a bed made up in a boarding house, toys on the floor of a child's room. It is less like visiting a ghost town and more like stepping into a photograph taken the day everyone left and discovering that the photograph has 3 dimensions and you can walk inside it. The girl who said goodbye to God may not have been real, but Bodie is, and it stays with you. Number 5. Thurmond, West Virginia. In 1910, Thurmond, West Virginia was generating more railroad freight revenue than Cincinnati and Richmond combined. Sit with that for a moment. A town of fewer than 1,000 people in a narrow canyon along the New River was outperforming major American cities in the only metric that mattered in that era, the movement of coal. Captain William Thurmond had received 73 acres in 1873 as payment for survey work. When the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway ran its main line through the New River Gorge, those 73 acres became the most strategically valuable strip of land in the entire region. Every coal train from every mine in the gorge had to stop in Thurmond. Coal was assembled here. Crews changed here. Locomotives took on coal and water here. Captain Thurmond banned alcohol on his land. So on the other side of the river, the Dunglen Hotel opened with no such restrictions and became famous for a poker game that reportedly ran without interruption for 14 consecutive years. What killed Thurmond was technology. Steam locomotives had to stop every 100 miles or so to take on coal and water. Thurmond was exactly that stop. When American railroads converted to diesel engines in the late 1940s, those diesel locomotives could run for hundreds of miles without stopping. Overnight, Thurmond had nothing left to offer. The hotels had no guests, the banks had no business, the families had no reason to stay. Today, Thurmond is part of the New River Gorge National Park. The old depot is a visitor center. Amtrak stops 3 times a week, one of the last places in America where a national passenger train stops at what is functionally a ghost town. Fewer than 5 people hold official residence in Thurmond today, and if you stand in the middle of the street on a quiet afternoon, you can hear the river, the wind in the canyon walls, and the occasional creak of the old depot settling on its foundation. That's all. Number 4. Kennecott, Alaska. Getting to Kennecott, Alaska is not a casual decision. You fly into Anchorage, you drive 5 hours to the end of the road, and then you get on a shuttle or ride a bicycle down a former railroad bed through one of the most spectacular wilderness corridors in North America, the Wrangell St. Elias National Park, the largest national park in the United States. larger than Switzerland. At the end of that journey, in the shadow of glaciers and mountains, you find Kennecott. In 1900, prospectors discovered what turned out to be one of the richest copper deposits ever found in North America. The Kennecott Copper Corporation moved in. They didn't just build a mine, they built an entire infrastructure from nothing, including a 1906-mile railroad through wilderness terrain that engineers said was impossible. At its peak, Kennecott produced over 1 billion pounds of copper. The 14-story red mill building processed ore brought directly from mines blasted into the glaciers above town. Workers lived in the town year-round, through winters that lasted 7 months and temperatures that dropped to 40 below. There was a company store, a hospital, a school, a recreation hall. The company tried to make Kennecott livable. They largely succeeded. In 1938, the most accessible copper deposits were exhausted. The company gave workers 4 days' notice. In 4 days, Kennecott went from a functioning town to an empty one. People left food on shelves. Equipment sat where it last ran. The mill building stood on its foundation with its machinery intact because it was too far away to be worth salvaging. The National Park Service took over decades later. Today, the red buildings of Kennecott stand against the glacier in one of the most photographed scenes in Alaska, a company town preserved at the exact moment it died, with ice and mountain as its only company. Number 3. Cahokia, Illinois. Every town on this list died within the last 200 years. Most of them died within the last 100. Cahokia is different. 1,000 years ago, on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River, in what is now southern Illinois, a city stood that was larger than London. At its peak around 1100 AD, Cahokia had a population of between 10,000 and 20,000 people, making it the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. It had neighborhoods, markets, plazas, and a central pyramid called Monk's Mound that is still standing today, larger at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It had a woodhenge, a circle of enormous timber poles used as a calendar to track the solstices. It had sophisticated agriculture, long-distance trade networks reaching from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes, and a social hierarchy complex enough to require a ruling class, a priest class, and a laboring class. And then sometime around 1350 AD, it was gone. The people left, not all at once but in a slow withdrawal that archaeologists have been piecing together for decades. Nobody knows exactly why. The leading theories involve climate change, a prolonged drought that disrupted agriculture, compounded by deforestation, soil depletion, and possibly political collapse. There's evidence of flooding. There's evidence of conflict. What there is not is a single clean cause. The descendants of Cahokia's people became the various Mississippian cultures found across the American Southeast and Midwest. Their civilization didn't end, it dispersed. But Cahokia the city, Cahokia the achievement, was abandoned and slowly swallowed by the land. American children learn about the Aztecs and the Maya. They learn about ancient Rome. Very few of them are ever taught that a city the size of London once stood where suburban St. Louis now sprawls, and that the people who built it left behind a mystery that archaeology still hasn't fully solved. Monk's Mound is still there, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Cars drive past it on the highway every day. Most of the drivers don't know what it is. Number 2. Fayette, Michigan. There are ghost towns that are ruins, and then there is Fayette. Fayette, Michigan sits on a natural harbor on the Upper Peninsula's Garden Peninsula, one of the most beautiful pieces of geography in the Great Lakes region, a curving bay sheltered by 80-foot limestone bluffs that turn gold in the late afternoon light. The Jackson Iron Company established Fayette in 1867 for a single purpose, to smelt iron ore into pig iron, using the hardwood forests of the Upper Peninsula as fuel, and the harbor as a shipping point to the industrial cities of the lower lakes. At its peak, 500 people lived in Fayette. The company built them a complete town: company houses, a hotel, an opera house, a company store. The blast furnaces ran day and night, filling the harbor with the smell of smoke and iron. The iron workers were skilled men. They understood the furnaces the way miners understand the seams, by feel and by memory, and by long years of hard-won experience. Their families built lives on the harbor. Children grew up to the sound of the furnaces and the sight of ore boats moving in and out of the bay. In 1891, charcoal-based iron smelting became economically obsolete. Cheaper methods, more efficient fuels, and better located production facilities had made Fayette's entire operation uncompetitive. The Jackson Iron Company shut down almost immediately. Fayette emptied within months. Michigan took over the site in 1959. Today, Fayette Historic State Park preserves 22 of the original structures: the blast furnaces, the superintendent's house, the opera house, the workers' cottages, in a state that is half ruin, half restoration. Standing on the harbor at Fayette in the evening, with the limestone bluffs catching the last light and the old furnaces rising against the sky, it is genuinely difficult to believe this place is real. It looks like someone built a movie set, and then remembered it was a graveyard. Number 1. Picher, Oklahoma. Every town on this list ended. Picher, Oklahoma is the only one on this list that was murdered. Not by neglect, not by economics, not by a fire or a flood or a railroad line that moved. Picher was killed by the industry that built it, poisoned over decades by the very material it had been created to extract, and then, when the damage was finally undeniable, it was simply erased. Picher was the center of the tri-state mining district, which produced more lead and zinc ore than anywhere else in the world during the first half of the 20th century. The mines here supplied the lead for bullets used in both world wars. At its peak, Picher had 20,000 residents. There were schools, churches, a movie theater, a thriving Main Street. Underneath the town and piled in enormous man-made mountains above it were the consequences. The mines produced millions of tons of a byproduct called chat, a fine sandy waste material laced with lead and cadmium. The chat piles, some of them 30 stories tall, surrounded the town. Children played on them. Runoff from them contaminated the groundwater and the local creek. By the 1970s, health studies were finding elevated blood lead levels in an overwhelming percentage of Picher's children. Lead poisoning causes permanent neurological damage. It cannot be undone. The children of Picher paid with their developing brains for the lead that won 2 wars. The federal government designated Picher a Superfund site in 1983. Studies found that 60% of the children in Picher had dangerous blood lead levels. Mine shafts had undermined so much of the ground beneath the town that entire city blocks were at risk of sudden collapse. In 2006, the federal government offered to buy out every remaining resident. Most accepted. Then, in May 2008, a Category EF4 tornado struck Picher directly, killing 8 people and destroying most of what remained. By 2009, Picher was officially dissolved as a municipality. One resident refused to leave throughout the entire process. Gary Lindeman, who operated a salvage yard on the edge of town, told reporters he planned to stay until they physically removed him. He was the last official resident of Picher, Oklahoma. The chat piles are still there. The poison creek is still there. A few structures still stand, slumping on ground that is hollow beneath them. Where 20,000 people once lived, there is almost nothing. The industry took the lead, and the zinc and the profit. It left the children with the rest.